Hey, welcome back to the Metropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today is May 22nd. It's a holiday in most parts of Canada. Happy holidays if you had a day off work today. I'm home on a Monday afternoon. And what a Monday afternoon today, because we had some breaking news, so I'm glad I'm around to do this, I suppose. This is the FAQ, Frequently Asked Questions version 4.0. Just came out a couple hours ago. Thanks so much to all. There's a couple people actually that dropped by my Chinteggy.net game to yell, hey, SYNC BRE watch is over. So thanks for that. This is an FAQ, and these come out not frequently enough, but when they come out, they're always really exciting because it generally clarifies, clears, changes, erratas, a lot of questions that people have with Netrunner. Specifically, I've been talking a lot about this on my channel, is that we have an unofficial FAQ, and that thing doesn't have any sort of weight in tournament settings, I suppose. Technically it shouldn't, and only once the FAQ comes out, things change. So this is the FAQ 4.0, just came out this afternoon. Worth noting, it's not effective until June 2nd for some reason. Generally, these things are effective immediately, I think. So if you have a tournament in the next couple of weeks, entirely disregard all this stuff. Interestingly enough, this is the last FAQ, which came out effective of, what is it? This is September 26th. So it's been about 8 months since we have an update to the FAQ. And I think that's kind of an issue right now with considering, like, oh, we'll get to it in a second, but there's been a lot of problems in the last couple of months that need FAQs almost immediately. And I don't think these are coming out soon enough. I don't want to open this with negativity. This is awesome. I'm super excited about this. And Michael Boggs, I think you did a really good job with this FAQ. I've read through it already. And a lot of things are a lot more clear, especially with the explanations of things. So good stuff altogether. So what my plan for this video is we're going to run through this. One of the best things they do with this FAQ, so if you've read the last one, is that they have all the changes that are made are actually highlighted in blue text. So we're going to go through this and read all the blue text. I highly recommend you to go through this and read all the text, especially if you haven't read the previous FAQ, because there's a lot of very interesting stuff here, a lot of explanations, a lot of cool edge cases, and it's generally a lot of fun. So yeah, without further ado, let's roll through this. By the way, SYNC BRE watch, 3 months. So I guess we'll get to that when we get to that. Section 1 is card errata, and this is probably, in some ways, the most important thing in the whole FAQ, because cards that are mentioned in this text are functionally different, or not functionally, they don't always have to be functionally, but are in the tournament setting at least, have different text on them than what they normally do. That's not so much an issue. I'm glad this happens, but you should be reading this definitely if you want to play in a tournament setting, just so you're not upset when a card works differently than you intended to. First case is Script, limit 1 per deck. That's not going to say it on the core set, but that is a big deal in Netrunner nowadays. Interestingly enough, and this is a bit negative, I suppose, but when I started playing Netrunner, and for like maybe 1 or 2 years after that, this errata section was like 3 entries. I think it was like E3 feedback implants, pawn, and maybe Director Haas, I don't entirely remember. And in the last, oh man, like you see the numbers or the icons and associated things, just like Terminal Directive in the first 2 data packs of this last cycle, the Mars Red Sun cycle, takes up almost half this page, which is kind of nuts. So something's changed to the quality control of this game, and that's kind of obvious. But let's jump into this. We start with Script. It's added to the ability limit 1 per deck. That changes nothing really. Director Haas, they changed a bit about how clicks are distributed later in the FAQ, so this functionally doesn't change anything. And here we get to the first functional change, Scavenge. So Scavenge should read trash an installed program if you do install a program from your grip or heap. I guess we actually probably should have talked about Scavenge first. This is Scavenge. Scavenge has an additional cost associated to it, which lets you forces you to trash an installed program, and then you can install a program from your grip or heap, lowering the install cost by the program that you trashed. Now, technically, if you're in a situation where you have a Scavenge and you don't have a program in your heap, playing this card you're technically not allowed to play this card, and a lot of this has to do with the ways that Netrunner decides or discerns what is considered changing game state. Now, the additional cost, when playing an effect, it can only be played in Netrunner but outside of its costs, it changes the game state immediately. So playing Scavenge when you have a program installed, trashing the program is not considered changing the game state due to the fact that additional costs or any costs are not considered when it comes to changing the game state. And you can only do something if it changes the game state. Now, if you don't know about Scavenge, you can actually scavenge. You can trash an installed program, it goes to the heap, and you can reinstall it with a Scavenge, which is actually pretty useful in a lot of Shaper decks or if you're running certain AIs. Now, the problem with Scavenge was if you didn't have any programs in your heap, If you played Scavenge to trash like your admin, to reinstall your admin, and you had no programs in the heap, you couldn't actually do that unless you had programs in your grip, because now you have the ability to change the game state, but you didn't before. And how do you prove you have programs in your grip? You can't really show that to the runner. It's technically, you're not allowed to show your hand to the runner, or the other way around, or to the corp, excuse me. You're not allowed to show information that's not meant to be shown. So in some cases you had to call like a judge over. It was really, really clumsy. But basically what they did to change this card is they removed the additional cost of the card and they just put it on the card's ability. So now it just says trash an installed program instead of an additional cost trash the program, which means you're always going to be able to fire this card, because you're always going to be able to change the game state whether or not there are programs in your grip or your heap. And that's awesome. It just makes this card easier to play, and it lines up better with additional rules changing the game state ruling. So that's good. It just doesn't change how this card works technically, specifically if you didn't understand how that those technicalities work. It's all in all better. We have Pawn. Pawn is one of the cards that was errated a couple times now. It just makes it more clear of how it works. No real big changes here. And here we get to the first big change, and this is Power Shutdown. This is Power Shutdown, and it's an absurdly powerful card, pun intended. So Power Shutdown says you can only play this if the runners ran on their last turn, and you get to trash X cards from the top of R&D. Now the runner trashes one installed program or piece of hardware with an install cost of X or less. So we can't really argue what was the intention of printing this card, but at least from a face value, it looks like they printed this card as a way to attack the runner's installed program and hardware, something that Corps can't really do that easily. Now, Power Shutdown is an incredibly strong card and is the backbone into at least two really, really powerful tournament archetype decks. And it might not be obvious why, more specifically because this wasn't intended, or not intended, this isn't played in those decks to attack programs or hardware. This was played to set up some really absurd combos, and combos that are game winning, and that a lot of people found that to be an issue. So just to give you an idea of Power Shutdown, how it was played, is if the runners ran, a lot of corps would play Power Shutdown, and you notice any card with X on it has like some really ridiculous edge cases. What they would do is they would choose X to be all their cards in their R&D. That sounds like crazy, but what they would do is if you ran, I would Power Shutdown and say I had 30 cards in my R&D, I would fire all 30 cards. Yeah, you'd have to trash a program or hardware. Generally, it wasn't important what you picked because we're going to win this turn anyways. Why do you do that? With a Jackson Howard on the table, or whether you install one, you can now remove Jackson Howard from the game to shuffle 3 cards from archives into R&D. Now, mind you, your entire deck is in R&D, so you generally get the perfect pick of what 3 cards you want to make your R&D. So you basically 3 cards, you do shuffle them so you don't pick the order, and this becomes your new R&D. Why do you want to do that? Because there is a card called Accelerated Diagnostics. If you play this, you get a look at the top 3 cards of R&D. If any of them are operations, which they all are, considering you just chose what they are, you get to play them ignoring all additional costs. Why is that good? I'm not going to go too deep into it, but the basics are cerebral imaging. A lot of the times they would build a deck that could fire this off a couple times. They would fire like 1 Power Shutdown and then a couple Jackson Howards, and they'd be able to score 7 points of agendas in 1 turn using some ridiculous doubles that they get to play a lot cheaper, or with Accelerated Diagnostics. Another very strong tournament deck. The idea was they would score breaking news, and then they would accelerate Diagnostics into a news cycle, which lets them fire the when scored ability on an agenda. Mind you, they don't even have to forfeit an agenda. And they would give the runner 2 tags, and then they would play boom. This could come out of nowhere. The corp basically needed a breaking news scored and then 3 other cards in hand, one of them being Jackson Howard, the other 2 being non-trashable. And you could get kills on turn 3, turn 4 pretty reliably, and it was incredibly good. This was called Near Hub NEH Railgun, generally. That's what it was referred to. Now, these decks were really good. Cerebral Imaging, 7-point combo, NEH, Near Earth Hub Railgun were very strong decks that have won big tournaments. They've been at top tables of worlds, stuff like that all the time. And now they don't work at all. What they did for Power Shutdown is they've errated it. They said now when you Power Shutdown, the X value that you choose cannot be higher than the highest install cost of any of the runners or runners installed programs or hardware. So if you wanted to Power Shutdown for 30, you can't do that unless the runner has a 30 cost hardware or program installed, which that doesn't exist in the game. I think the highest install cost is 18 for Monolith, or is Monolith 14? I think it's 18. So that's done. That's just donezo. Unless you like get really close to decking yourself and you have like 6 cards left in your deck and the runner plays like a security nexus, you can Power Shutdown for 6, I suppose. But largely I think these tournament deck archetypes, which a lot of people don't enjoy playing against because they are inherently non-interactive, they just want to build these 3 cards in hand, or for Cerebral Imaging it's like 11 or something, and just fire it off. Doesn't exist anymore. And I'm kind of excited about that because I wasn't the biggest fan about this sort of decks. I know a lot of people, especially newer players to the game, get really frustrated playing against these combo decks, or just suddenly they lose in one turn and they don't really feel like they can counterplay against it. I'm not saying that there wasn't counterplay against Railgun or CI7. They do make for some very interesting matches when your opponent knows how to play against them. But I think overall, I'm pretty happy with this change. And I know a lot of people that I've talked to and met over my time playing Netrunner are super excited about this change too. So those are two archetypes that are kind of out of the water. I still think you can play CI decks, just play Hasty. Hasty Relocation is still pretty good. That's cool. All right, Power Shutdown. That's a big deal. Punitive Counterstrike. This is Punitive Counterstrike. It's an operation that you play after the runner has stolen an agenda on their last turn. You do a trace. Trace 5 is pretty big, and then if successful, you get to do a meat damage equal to the number of agenda points on agendas they stole during their last turn. Now, the new ruling in the FAQ actually overwrites the previous ruling, which I think was given by Damon Stone when he was around. And this only matters for two specific cards in the card pool. First is Global Food Initiative. This is a very popular card. It's a 3/5 agenda, and more specifically, it's worth 1 fewer agenda points when it's in the runner's score area. Now, the ruling previously, people asked, hey, if the runner steals a Global Food Initiative and I try to hit him with a Punitive Counterstrike, how much damage does it do? And Damon Stone's answer was, well, this is in the runner's score area where it's worth 2 points, so you only do 2 damage. And that's not great. The biggest reason why the difference between 2 and 3 damage is very, very important is if the runner steals a Global Food Initiative and you have 2 Punitive Counterstrikes in hand, if this did 3 damage, you could play 2 punitives and kill them, because 6 damage generally kills most runners. With this doing 2 damage, you need 3 punitives, unlikely for that to fire. Now this did change. Now Punitive Counterstrike says it should read the damage is equal to the number of printed agenda points. So strictly now Global Food Initiative will always do 3 damage, regardless where it is. Or this only matters on the runner score here, but it will do 3 damage. That makes Punitive Counterstrike strictly better. Global Food Initiative does see it play in a lot of decks. It's a very, if not the most common 3-point agenda, so it just makes it a lot better. I mentioned 2 cards this interacts with. The other is Merger, which interacts negatively, I suppose. This is worth 1 additional points in the runner's score area, so Damon's ruling said this would do 3 damage. Now with the new ruling, it only does 2 damage. So while Merger's not as good with Punitive Counterstrike, Global Food Initiative is better, and I think overall it's an increase in power level of Punitive Counterstrike, just because Global Food Initiative sees a lot of play, while Merger is pretty niche as a card outside of fast advanced decks. So overall, very good. Very, very, very good for Punitive Counterstrike. Moving on, we have security testing. I gotta close some of these. We don't need all these open, right? We have security testing here, which I spelled wrong, apparently, in my prep for this. So security testing is a great criminal card. This used to be very, very common in just about all criminal decks. And it just says, when your turn begins, choose a server. The first time you make a successful run on this server, instead of accessing cards, gain 2 credits. So with a Desperado, you can make this into a 3-credit click, especially if there are unprotected remotes, or, yeah, mostly unprotected remote servers, or even central servers, things like archives. Didn't get that much protection when this card came out. So how this card works is it forces you to do this action. So when your turn begins, you have to pick a central server, or sorry, you have to pick a server. Now, if you're playing against a corp in which you want to run, say they only have 3 servers, all 3 central servers, and you want to run all 3 central servers in this turn, security testing actually kind of puts you out in some way, if you want to access from all 3 servers, mind you. Just because you have to put this on a server, and if you don't know how your turn's going to go, you're generally, no matter what, you're going to have to choose a server for this to go on, and you're not going to be accessing from that. Yeah, okay. How they've changed that is now they added a May ability to this card, which I think makes it very user-friendly in some ways. It says when your turn begins, you may. So now when your turn begins, you don't have to choose a server. You can choose not to put this on a server, which is cool if you don't know whether or not you're going to have to access all servers in a turn. That comes up a lot of times when you're playing criminal decks with a keyhole in it, where you want to run R&D and you want to run archives, but you also want to run HQ for an account siphon. Now you have the ability to not security test anything, and I think overall that makes this card strictly better. I've seen a lot of games, or the problem with security testing is actually comes down to player discipline, because I've seen a lot of people flub this card up, especially, well, not especially, but like I've seen this happen at high tables, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see, where the runner leaves their security testing on archives. They just put their token there and they forget to move it for a couple turns. And then there's agendas in archives. It's the last turn. They're like, okay, I keyhold things. Now I'm going to go to archives to pick them up on their last click. And right before they access, the corp says, no, you just gained 2 credits. You forgot to move your security testing. And that is crushing. Now, on the opposite end, if you forget to put your security testing on a server at the beginning of your turn, you're just not going to get it. So every turn, you have to fire your beginning of turn triggers and pick your security testing server. It was the same with, technically it is the same, it doesn't change that much, right? Because it was the same without that ruling, is that you had to pick a server. But at least now you can choose not to pick a server. I guess that means if you forget to pick a server at the beginning of your turn, you're going to lose out on your 2+ credits perhaps, so just be mindful about this. Overall, it just will never put you in a situation where you want to be able to access all servers that you can't. When you want to be able to access, yeah, exactly, where you can't. So overall, I think that's good. It just makes this card easier to play as long as you're remembering your timing. I've seen a lot of people goof it, where they either forget to put this on it or forget to move it, and it punishes them. So now, at least if you forget to move it, you get nothing. Q Coherence Chip. I was pretty sure this was changed before, but trash coherence. So yeah, this is Q Coherence Chip. It came out in Data and Destiny. It is the cheapest MU in the game, but it says trash Q Coherence Chip when a program is trashed. All they've changed is installed program is trashed, so no longer if you lose a program from hand to net damage, does the SYNC get trashed, or meat damage, or brain damage. So the only way to trash this is by trashing an installed program. Makes this card strictly better. I think that's good. I think, yeah, this was intended to have installed on it anyways, so that's great. All right, we're on the other side. I don't think I'm going to move my face. We're just going to go through this. Rachel Beckman, that's fine. It works the same. Wireless, yeah, that's not a change. Progenitor has a change here. It just says when virus counters are purged, instead of removing all virus counters from the hosted card, remove, as opposed to how it says now. I don't think this is a very meaningful change. It just probably clears up the wording so much. It still works the way that you probably think it works. I just think the wording is a bit clearer. I didn't run into any problems with this card so far. So it's good that they're clearing that up, but I don't see how that matters so much. Let me know if you figure out how that works. Builder of Nations got a pretty sizable change here. So this is Builder of Nations. It is a Wayland ID of 4012, and it says the first time the runner encounters a piece of ice with at least 1 advancement token on it each turn, do 1 meat damage. And they've actually changed how this works. They've changed when the net damage, or sorry, the meat damage happens. This one just says, well, let's close all these. This just says when you encounter the ice, right? So it was unclear if that happens at the beginning of the encounter, at the end of the encounter, somewhere in the middle of it. It just says when you encounter, which isn't great writing, I suppose. And they've changed it to the first time an encounter with a piece of ice with at least 1 advancement token ends each turn, do 1 meat damage. So when your encounter with the ice ends, you'll take a meat damage. So you can always face check into things, and it can be lethal when you leave the ice, not when you hit it. That's good for a couple reasons. Firstly, if the ice gets trashed, your encounter with it still ends, so you're still going to take meat damage no matter what, if the ice is trashed or not trashed. If you bypass the ice, I don't think you encounter it, right? I guess it depends what you're bypassing it with. Because some say when approach, some say when you encounter bypass, so I guess. But overall, I think that does make this better. It also makes it in theory that if you somehow manage to advance a Koma Inu, you can kill the runner, because the meat damage will happen after they've taken all the net damage. So that's kind of sweet, as opposed to having before when they hit it, so then Koma Inu isn't lethal. Overall, I think it makes Builder of Nations a lot stronger. I don't know how good that ID still is, but it's definitely better, so that's cool. Sorry if my face blocked some of that. SYNC BRE. So this is a big reason why we cared about FAQs, or we're very public on our fight against FAQs, because we went on SYNC BRE watch. 3 months, I think, was what it took. This is SYNC BRE. This is one of the biggest problems that we saw with templating, or the most obvious problem we saw with templating a while. And that was the second trace. It says if successful, the runner accesses 1 fewer cards whenever they access cards. Notice how it doesn't have a timing attached to this. So in theory, you could argue that this lasts until the end of the game. This was, like most of the other problems that we're going to mention going forward, were clarified in the UFAQs, but the problem is the UFAQs are not tournament legal, so it's really important that these FAQs come out, and they come out promptly. They've changed it, so now it says access 1 fewer cards when they access a card for the remainder of this run. That's how it was intended. We know Michael Boggs went out and say that that was the way the card was intended, so now it's on paper, and SYNC BRE Watch officially closes. I'm kind of happy about that. Going on, these are a bunch of just typing errors mostly. This is Severnius Stim Implant. It's a card that I've been playing more of than I thought I ever would. Notice that this subtype here is Cybernetics. That's actually a new subtype, considering all of their cards that were like this were cybernetic. So they just removed the S from it. They just changed the subtype. just a typing error, goofed. And this one's actually pretty big. This is Mca Informant. So this is Mca Informant. This card I actually made a video about previously talking about this interaction because it's not very intuitive, and at least from a distance it looks incredibly uninteractive and maybe demoralizing. So notice how Mca Informant says, install Mca Informant on a connection as a hosted condition counter with the text the runner is considered to be tagged. Now, abstractly, this is cool because you slap it on your runner's connections and now they're tagged. But there was a problem with this kind of slept through, is that there's actually one corporation card that was a connection. So the idea is that you could play the Mca Informant on your own corporate troubleshooter and ice it up, and if the runner can't get to it, they're tagged, which is an issue if they want to not die, want to have money, want to have resources, and there's a lot of reasons why being tagged is bad. It also created some interesting issues where you could install Mca Informant on a face-down corporate troubleshooters because subtypes still exist on unresed ICE, or unresed, upgrades and assets. So you had to show the runner this was a corporate troubleshooter. It was just a total mess. This interaction didn't prove to be that big of a negative play experience or that strong or reliable in my testing. Admittedly, I didn't test this much, but I think a lot of people will be super glad to hear install Mca Informant on a connection resource. The same templating that's on most other cards that involve the word connection on it. So this interaction is just out of the game. Beep. So don't worry about that anymore. Mca Informant works the way that you think it does, and probably a lot of people will be happy to see that. Noreen 2.0. Notice Noreen 2.0 says deal 1 brain damage. If you've seen any other cards that do damage in Netrunner, they say do 1 brain damage. This one's an outlier for no one knows why. Now it says do 1 brain damage. Cool. Maxwell James came out. These are the beginning of the date, not what's it called, terminal directive cards. So this is Maxwell James. Trash. Derez a piece of ice protecting a remote server. Use this ability only after a successful run on HQ. Very similar to SYNC BRE. This was just missing some sort of timing. Because again, you could argue whether this says, or whether this means, use this ability only after a successful run on HQ this turn, this game, this tournament, this week. It wasn't very clear. And we kind of, before the UFAC came out, a lot of people had to guess how this card was intended in its design. Luckily, it was clarified here in the FAQ and the UFAC. It was clarified to work the way that most people thought it worked, which is you can only use it if you made a successful run on HQ during this turn. So it's very similar to Emergency Shutdown. I know some people are complaining how good this card is because in theory you can de-res a card when you're encountering it, which makes the runner unable, or the corp unable, to res it again because you're no longer in the approach step. That still works. I think that's how the card was intended to be. It's a pretty strong card, mind you. But at least we know how this HQ timing works. You have to run HQ, then run the remote. Great card still. So I'm glad they clarified that. That works how we think it is, or think it should. This is Dig Deer. Not a big change here. They just kind of clarified the wording on it. Maybe that did create an edge case where things were strange, but it used to say well, we'll see what it used to say. It used to say when you install a program on Degdeer, lower its install cost by 1. So I'm not sure if there's arguments there where you already installed it and now the install cost is lowered as opposed to install it at a reduction, right? So it's a bit kind of confusing. And now they say lower the install cost of the program you install in Degdeer by 1. Is that any different? I don't know. Anyways, that's just more clear. I didn't see any big issues with that, but that does feel a bit clumsy at least. Alright, this is a twofer. Executive Functioning and Home Guard have the same errata because if you notice here, these are both trace 4 do something. But very importantly, all traces in this game, how does this work? Yeah, all traces in the game generally come with trace 4 if successful do something, and these didn't have them. So it doesn't matter if you win or lose the trace if you're playing these cards, the ability fires, and that's a mistake. They've now added if successful to both of these cards, so you now have to beat the trace. That's a big deal because it greatly changes the power level of these cards. Now you actually have to beat the trace. I think a lot of people understood that and would have played that way anyways, but technically the way they're written, that doesn't matter, so I'm glad that they've sorted that out. This is our last card with an errata. It's Hortum. Hortum, they just goofed up the English. Notice how this says if there are 3 or more advancement. That's not English. It should say if Hortum has 3 or more advancement counters on it. The same way the next card or the previous card wrote. I just don't understand how 2 cards had such different thing, right? If Colossus has 3 or more. So anyways, it's written better now. It's written well. And that's it. That's all the erratas. A lot of these things, like the bottom half of this, is nothing new. Like these are all just clarifications that you could have assumed if you went on the UFAQs. So like SYNC BRE all the way to Severnius, Nerine, and all this other stuff. That's not a big deal. Well, it's a big deal because now you don't have to rely on the UFAQ, which you can. So I'm glad that they're clarified that, but no big changes. The big changes in this UFAQ: Mca Informant only works on a connection. Installed connection resource, big deal for corporate troubleshooter. Builder nations now works better, 100% better. Punitive counterstrike, generally better. Security testing, generally better. Power shutdown, no more combos. No more combos. Generally, a lot of people like that. And Scavenge is now technically playable if there's no programs in your heap, which is it just works better. Cool. That's the majority of the changes in terms of like your day-to-day card playing. There's some other cool changes here with the other errata. If you didn't notice, and I didn't make a video about terminal directive so far, but I was really upset with one part of terminal directive. Largely the recommended deck list, the shaper recommended deck list in the product, like in this Netrunner product, which is advertised as being, do you have one core set? Buy terminal directive, have fun. You actually couldn't build the recommended shaper deck list because it required 2 core sets, which is like an absurd oversight, and that's like really, really bad. So they now have created a new deck list. I did not go through and check what they've added to take the slots in, but I'm pretty sure the old deck list had 3 copies of modded. I think they just show what it is here. What are these stars for? Maybe, I don't know. But it had 3 copies of cards that you don't have 3. Yeah, 3 data suckers. It had like, yeah. Anyways, it's better. There's also technically minor spoilers here, but one of the super minor spoilers for terminal directive, one of the corp objectives in the box says steal agenda points, which you can't do as a corp. So they changed it to score. Good. Going on, there's not a lot of blue text here. This is actually really important. We'll take a second to talk about this because this has come up many times in comments on the videos we put up before. And it's the idea of ordinal events. And this comes up in a couple interactions. So they clarify here, when you have an ordinal event referring to like the timing or like, the idea is an ordinal event is something like the first time this happens or the second time this happens, do something else. What they've clarified that is the trigger for an ordinal event does not care if the event was replaced or prevented, as long as the trigger or the condition which would have fired the ordinal event would have fired. They have an example here involving Tori Hanzo and NetShield, because I guess we'll pull these up. So Tori Hanzo says the first time you would do any amount of net damage, you pay 2 to do a brain damage. But if you have NetShield, you can actually prevent the net damage. So if they try and hit you with a NetShield and you prevent the damage with NetShield, Tori Hanzo can't fire again because the ordinal event of the first time any amount of net damage was trying to be delivered was beat. Yeah. So Tori Hanzo can't replace for the rest of the run. I think the way that this comes up the most often is with solid-state slums and the controlling the message. So this was also something that was only held up in unofficial FAQs, I think. But so solid-state slums says once per turn, when you pay the trash cost of an access card, remove that card from the game instead of trashing it. And controlling the message says the first time the runner trashes an installed corp card, trace 4, give him a tag. And this interaction is super good on the side of the runner, because if the runner runs and accesses an asset or upgrade and trashes it and removes it from solid-state slums, not only is this trace not going to fire because they didn't technically trash something, but it's also not going to fire if they run their second click and properly trash a card. The reason is solid-state slums, or the controlling the message more accurately, cares about the ordinal ability or the ordinal event of the first time the runner trashes an installed card. And the ordinal event of the runner attempting to trash an installed card already happened with solid-state slums. Now the actual trashing of the card doesn't matter. So controlling the message doesn't care that the card wasn't trashed. It only cares about the ordinal event of the runner attempting to trash a card, or the trigger of like the runner trashing a card, which solid-state slums replaces. So this holds up, and there's a couple cases where this will matter, but basically anytime you see a card that says the first time or even the second time, if you replace the trigger on this thing or prevent it, that counts as the first time and this thing won't fire. And I think that's a pretty big deal. I think this is a really good way to explain it because that's actually a pretty complicated idea. And I've seen a lot of clumsier ways of putting that through. There's also some blue text here to talk about passing, what passing a piece of ice is. This matters for a couple things, I guess. Yeah, the runner passes a piece of ice at step 4 of the run. Usually occurs when encounter ends after the resolution of unbroken subroutines, but can only occur. Okay, it just clarifies what passing is in terms of the rules. I don't think that was clarified before. That's good because some certain cards care about that. This section is really good. It's actually really sweet, and I'm really excited that they're explaining a lot of these things. It talks about what triggers are, triggered abilities. It talks about the different sort of conditions. This is not something I can intelligently summarize because this does the best summary of itself, I think. There's nothing really new in here. This just kind of clarifies how triggers work and stacking triggers and triggered abilities, conditional abilities. It's just good. It's just a good read through. It's not that wordy, and it's relatively good to understand, but nothing really new here. This is all just nice explanations about like stacking triggers and stuff like that. Yeah, same idea, just explanations of abilities. And then force encounters. This is cool that they added this. So as the card pool expanded, we had more cards that like ice or stuff like that that you could access, or sorry, that you can encounter within weird windows where you're generally not used to encountering things. So they talk about Shiro, that's a good one. The Twins is another card that lets you encounter things. And they basically just explain when you encounter a piece of ice, jump to steps 3 to 3.2, and it's just like a normal encounter. That's really good. There's an explanation here about additional costs, saying that an additional cost is printed on the card. You're never forced to pay additional costs. So the ever popular example, if the runner tries to force the corp to res an archer with a blackguard. So if the runner is playing blackguard and they expose an archer, it says whenever you expose a card, the corp must res it, paying the res cost of Able. But archer has an additional cost that says an additional cost to res archer. The corp must forfeit an agenda. You can refuse to res the archer because you're never going to be forced to pay additional costs. This is something we've known before. I don't know if it's explained entirely in a paragraph. I think it was just generally explained in like an FAQ section, which is at the bottom of the FAQ. Yeah, that's good. That's pretty good. These are the FAQ section, which is just like questions. And they're good to read through here. I don't think we have anything new. I guess they clarified that you can use 2 false leads when the runner's turn starts, and they still hit the draw step, they still hit the discard step, but they don't have any clicks or actions to take, which is great. They changed how power shutdown works. That's good. We've gone through that before, and I think that's largely it. I think there are some changes. What else are we missing? I think they clarified somewhere that you can now actually score an agenda during step 1.2 in your draw phase. Like if you have an agenda on the table, you can score it before you draw a card. And if you like want to prevent yourself from decking yourself, I guess that matters. And that's largely it. Oh, this is a cool one. This is the only new FAQ thing they added like this. So there's a Psychic Field. This was just a question that people had. So Psychic Field is a card that if you access it or expose it, you have to play a side game, and if it succeeds, it deals damage equal to the amount of cards in hand. And there's also this card called Famiko. I forget her full name. But Famiko says after you lose a side game, or you win a side game as a corp, do immediate damage. And they've clarified that if you have a Famiko on the table and the runner hits a Psychic Field, and they lose the side game, this does the net damage first, and then this does the meat damage. So it's actually lethal if the runner doesn't have any sort of net damage or meat damage protection. So that's cute. That's cool. That's mostly it. They have these new charts here. I think these are new. I'm pretty sure these are updated with these like actions, and these are actually really good. I think they're a lot easier. This does look new to me. None of the information is going to be new because they didn't actually change anything fundamentally about how the game works. They just clarified these things. These things are really good. I don't know if they Netrunner DB or sorry if Fantasy Flight distributes them separately, but they're really good just to have on hand, especially if you're playing on Jintegi.net because these sort of questions come up a lot. That's it. That's the FAQ. Overall, really excited that this is coming out. Good job, Michael Boggs and whoever else was involved on this. It doesn't really have credits, does it? Because these things need to be changed as soon as possible. I'd love for an FAQ to come out with every like data pack release. I don't know if that's asking for too much, just because there are questions, maybe a week after a data pack release. Because I think this should be released at the same timing structure as the unofficial FAQ, because if these things aren't coming out every month, there's going to be like 8 months at a time where we're depending on the UFAQ, which isn't a tournament legal document, and that's a problem. The timing structure at the end were revised, so that's good. overall, I'm really excited. I think there's a lot of good changes, and I know a lot of like really bitter things, or not bitter things, but things that people didn't like about Netrunner are no longer in the game as of June 2nd. Like people didn't like Power Shutdown, people didn't like Mca Informant, and now those are out of the game. So maybe they'll produce a better, like a more positive design space or a more positive gameplay experience for a lot of people. Overall, this is good. These are good. This is good. That's all I have to say, really. Thanks for joining me on this. If you have any questions or if there's anything I missed on this, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, happy net running. Reminder, this doesn't come into play until June 2nd. So if you do have tournaments this next couple following weeks, do respect Power Shutdown and stuff like that if you can. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. We got videos coming out most weekday nights, live streaming Thursday, 8:45 Eastern. Hopefully see you there.